go to war against two major empires? Why did Muhammad just name a successor? Why was Assad built on the site of the Temple Mount? No one knows the answers to any of these three questions.
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Noah, and I'm going to tell you the answers to these questions. So today I'm going to be responding to a lecture on YouTube titled The Golden Islamic Ages. It's by an individual called Professor Jiang. He's a Canadian-Chinese professor, a graduate from Yale. He's teaching in one of the high schools today in China, I believe. He has a YouTube channel called Predictive History. He speaks about history in general, but he spoke about Islam, about Christianity, about Judaism, and about Prophet Muhammad as well. He has been getting a lot of, let's say, traction recently. He's been having interviews. I believe he had also an interview recently, Sneeko. It's only a small part of it, and I saw a lot of misinformation. So I thought I must respond to this. I must make a video and comment on what is being said in that lecture. It has like 400, 500,000 views, like 500,000 views on YouTube. So I think it's worth definitely responding to. And I want to preface that by saying that he's not like an enemy of Islam or anything like that. He actually, we agree with him on many issues, many historical things, or many issues, let's just say, specifically about geopolitics, I would say. We agree with him a lot. He's not an enemy of Islam, he praises Muslims and stuff like that. But in this lecture, there is so much misinformation. I also want to preface it by saying that he admits that this is just my opinion, it's not a historical fact, which I kind of find contradictory, but I'm going to comment on that like during the video. Yeah, so let's get straight into it and see what he has to say and comment on it while he's giving his lecture.
Some questions that we'll look at today about Islamic Golden Age. The first major question is, while Europe was in its dark ages, Islam was embarked on its golden age. So the first question is, how did this happen? Why was there this divergence? Second question we're going to look at is, what ended the Islamic Golden Age? Why would this period come to an end? The third question we're going to look at is, eventually, how did Christian Europe overtake the Muslim world? Some quick facts about Islam. It is the world's second largest religion. Christianity has 2 billion people. Islam has 1 billion people.
Yes, that's not 100% accurate. If you actually look at the stats today, it's way more than that. I think the numbers of Muslims are underrepresented, and I think the number of Christians is overrepresented when it comes to these kind of statistical things, because they would like say someone is a Christian when they're counting the people who doesn't go to church, doesn't give Christianity. It's culturally Christian, and if you go ask them, are you Christian, they would probably say that they're not. They're just born and baptized, but they don't follow the religion. And there's a big number, huge number of conversion. We know that Islam is the biggest growing religion in the world. And we're talking about conversion rates. We look at the Pew Research Institute study, for example, they talk about conversion rate, not birth rate or anything like that, because that's another hoax they spread. But whether you want to look at the conversion or the birth rate, Muslims are more than that. I believe the Muslims today, without a shadow of a doubt, they're not going to be under 2 billion people. And the numbers of Christians are overrepresented, but they're overrepresented for a reason, because they don't want people to think that, Muslims are so many and the Christians are so little. So there's also reasons behind these numbers which are not factually represented.
They are divided into 2 major Shia, which is based primarily in Iran, and the Sunni, which is everywhere else. The Shia and the Sunni, the only major difference is that the Shia believe that only a direct descendant of Muhammad's grandson Ali can be the leader of the religion, whereas the Sunni do not believe this.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely an understatement. There's a lot more disagreements between Sunni and Shia. In the beginning, in the start, yes, you can say it started with this idea that who should have been the successor of the Prophet ﷺ after his death. But later on, it's become an entire religion with a new set of beliefs. And it's not just about Ali being the successor. They said like that his entire lineage, there must be someone from his lineage. You have the 12 people, 12 imams, and that you have it each time. You need to have a representative appointed by God as the leader of the Muslims, and he has to be from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, which is obviously not Islamic and not from Sunnah, hence why they are a small minority, like you're saying. So, but it's definitely not accurate to say that it's just one small disagreement or something. There's more disagreements about the companions of the Prophet, about the wives of the Prophet, and certain beliefs to do with infallibility, with people knowing the unseen and stuff like that. There's a lot more differences that arise later on, that it's not as simple as just like about Ali radiallahu anhu.
Now, this is a religion of 1 billion people, So there are many different belief systems, many different sects within this cosmology, but this is really the major difference, okay, between the Shia and the Sunni.
Yeah, there are many groups of people who believe different things, but in reality, all Muslims believe in the same Quran, believe in the same Prophet, believe in the same God. So unlike other religions, where the differences in belief will be big differences in theology and who's God, who's not God, and a number of books that they follow and issues like that, it's not the case when it comes to Muslims. Or these, like, if you want to use the term sects, their disagreements are not going to be like core foundation level, like for example, a different Quran or something, different numbers of books in the Quran, and issues like that.
So Muslim means to submit yourself to God, to believe in God, and to submit yourself wholeheartedly to Him. And Islam was founded by a man named Muhammad, who the Muslims consider the prophet of God, the final prophet, and Jesus was the penultimate prophet. And the legend is that at age 40, Muhammad, who is a merchant or a trader, he has a vision. He goes in a cave to meditate, and the archangel Gabriel visits him and reveals to him certain visions that he has memorized. And these visions become the basis for the holy book of the Muslim tradition called Quran.
Okay, that's another point which is not accurate, definitely. The first revelation the Prophet Muhammad had was in the cave of Hira. Cave of Hira is a cave where the Prophet ﷺ, because his people were idol worshippers, he used to go in seclusion. He used to try and worship God, and he had a first encounter with Angel Gabriel. And a few verses of the Quran was revealed. Let's say a few verses of the Quran, and then he came back, and then he was informed that he was a messenger from God. And then he had revelation of the Quran in 23 years. So it's not like that the basis of the Quran was that one incident of revelation, which was the first one in the cave of Hira. No, Quran was revealed throughout the 23 years of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Mecca and when he was in Medina. So that's not an accurate description, I would say, when it comes to that, for sure.
And Muhammad understands that his mission is to be a messenger of God and to reveal the truth of God to the pagan society in the Arabian world.
Yes, here is a very important point, because here you confuse the Islamic definition with the linguistic definition. So there is a technical definition to words, and there's a linguistic definition to words. Yes, so the word Muslim or Islam, it means submission. Muslim is someone who submits. But Islam itself, from an Islamic worldview, when Allah uses the word Islam or the Prophet uses the word Islam, it doesn't mean just someone who submits his will to God. That can include so many different people. That word Muslim specifically means the one who believes in the 5 pillars and 6 articles of faith. So a believer is the one who believes in 6 articles of faith. A mu'min and a Muslim is someone who believes in the 5 pillars. And a Muslim can be a mu'min can be a Muslim. But when the word is mentioned together, so every mu'min is a Muslim essentially. But when the 2 words are mentioned together, then we make a differentiation that the Islam refers to the 5 pillars and Iman refers to the 6 articles. That is a technical definition of the word Muslim. The linguistic definition, like we said, is the idea of submission. But the Islamic definition is about the 5 pillars. And we see this definition in the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where Angel Gabriel himself comes to the Prophet. And then he tries to teach people, or he's teaching the companions the religion. And he says to the Prophet, what is Islam? Then the Prophet doesn't say submission to the one true God, or submission to one God. The Prophet says Islam is to testify there's nothing worthy of worship except Allah, and the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger. Then to pray 5 times a day, basically the 5 pillars of Islam. And then he asks him, what is Iman, faith? And then he says, what are the 6 articles of faith? So this is what a Muslim is. And he uses this wrong assumption, and based on this wrong assumption, he is going to make a lot of, I would say, issues and problems during his lecture. He's going to conflate a lot of different terms and a lot of different teachings, because he's mixing technical definition with the Islamic definition.
Eventually, Islam will spread from the Arabian desert to all across the Middle East. They will conquer the Persian Empire, and they will take at least half of the Byzantine Empire, including the richest parts of the Byzantine Empire, which are Syria and Egypt. They will also take Jerusalem, where they will build something called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And legend has it that Muhammad ascended to heaven from this place. Now, what's really important for us to remember about this place is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's still there in Jerusalem, and it is built on top of something called the Temple Mount. Remember, in the year 70, the Romans burned down the Second Temple of the Jews, the holiest site in the Jewish faith. And then the Muslims came and built the Al-Aqsa Mosque on top of the Temple Mount. Now, this is a very strange thing to do. If the Muslim tradition is open, inclusive, and tolerant, and Jews are welcome into the tradition, why would you build a mosque on top of the Jewish holy site? That doesn't really make any sense. And quite honestly, this has been a mystery to everyone. No one has been able to figure this out, okay? So we will today attempt to solve one of the great mysteries in the Islam tradition. Why was the Al-Aqsa Mosque built on top of the Jewish Temple Mount? Okay?
All right, so before we solve this mystery, because he's going to mention it later, I'm going to give a bit more history on this idea. He essentially put the picture of what we refer to as the Dome of the Rock, Qubbat al-Sakhra, and he called the Qubbat al-Sakhra, or the Dome of the Rock, is Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's not accurate. And that's a very ABC kind of mistake, right? That's like elementary school when it comes to history, a mistake. That's not something that if you just did a bit of research and Googling, you would know that this is incorrect. So the Masjid Qubbat al-Sakhra, this mosque of the Dome of the Rock, is not what we call Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. It's not what Muslims believe to be the Masjid al-Aqsa. So perhaps you have a mystery there because you are conflating terms and ideas and understanding. Later on, like I said, I'm going to explain more history about this. But Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is this entire space that you see that is fenced, which is like 144,000 square meters. And it has a lot of different historical, let's say, monuments or historical things within, like around, I don't know, like a lot, like over 100 things that are there that are historical. And this entire fenced area is what we refer to as Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. There's even a musalla there, which is a place to pray, which people also refer to as Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which is the Masjid al-Qibla, the Masjid al-Qibli, the mosque of the Qibla. And it was called that because it's in the direction of the Qibla. And we don't say that that's alone also is Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, like I said, is the entire space. So it's not like Muslims have built Al-Masjid al-Aqsa over the Temple Mount. That's not accurate. But like I said, I'm going to talk more about his history because he's going to bring up this idea later on. But for now, let's continue hearing what he says.
There are 5 pillars of Islam. It is an extremely simple and clear religion when compared with Christianity and Judaism. Okay, there are 5 pillars to the religion. First of all, you have to believe that Allah, God, is the only God. Okay, and this mirrors the Christian and the Jewish faith.
Yeah, okay, so this doesn't mirror the Jewish and the Christian faith, and Muslims don't believe the Jews and the Christians are monotheistic in every way, especially the Christians. We believe they are polytheistic in their belief. They believe Jesus is God, they believe in the Trinity. So I would disagree with this idea that says that the Shahada is mirrored within the Christian and Jewish faith. The Shahada is also not just that there is one God. That's an incorrect definition of the Shahada. The Shahada is Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu means I testify or I bear witness. La ilaha, la means no. Ilaha is from aliha ya'lahu ilahatan fahuwa ma'luh. Ma'luh is ma'bud, the one who is worshipped. So la ilaha, there is nothing worshipped. There's nothing worthy of worship in the Islamic definition. When we say la ilaha illallah, there's nothing worthy of worship except Allah. So when you look at the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, we say definitely this idea is not mirrored within the Jewish or Christian tradition. And if it was, you didn't have all of these verses in the Quran saying, oh, people of the book do this, people of the book believe, people of the book do not exaggerate in their religion. Because if they already have the Shahada, then all what the Quran is going to be doing is to tell them to follow the Prophet. So that is definitely not accurate.
You are required to pray at least 5 times a day, facing the direction of Mecca. You must give money to the poor. You must fast during the holy days. The last thing is you must make something called the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to the holy site in Mecca and perform rituals in Mecca. This is something that all Muslims must do, and you will have the poorest Muslims. They will save their entire lives just so that they could make this Hajj. Okay? The Muslim people are probably the most devout, the most religious people you will meet. They take their religion very, very seriously.
I appreciate him saying that, and that's why I said he's not like an enemy of Islam. He seems like there is some good information what he says, but I would say overall this lecture has a lot of historical errors, and I was saying basic historical errors. So I'm highlighting this to show that he's not like an enemy or something. We shouldn't be like angry about what he says per se, but he's saying a lot of information, sure.
There are 3 major mysteries to the history of Islam that we still haven't really solved today. Okay, the first mystery is why do we have no early records for the first 100 years? What, for the first 100 years of the movement? Another strange thing is, why would the Muslims go to war against two major empires, the Romans and the Persians? That's kind of suicidal. They didn't know they were going to win, so why did they go to war? Okay, that's the first mystery we'll solve today. Second mystery is, remember I said that the Shia and the Sunni have a major sectarian divide. The Shia believe that only the descendants of Muhammad's grandson Ali can be the caliph, the leader of the Muslim people. The Sunnis don't. So why didn't Muhammad just name a successor and avoid civil wars that will erupt after his death? The third question is, why was Al-Aqsa built on the site of the Temple Mount? And again, no one knows the answers to any of these three questions, and no one will ever know because so much of the historical record has been lost to us. But I will try to provide you with an explanation, okay? Given my understanding of the Islamic world, which, by the way, is extremely limited, okay? So please ask questions, please challenge me. I'm looking at you, Doug. Okay, all right.
So he's going to repeat these questions again later on in the lecture. I'm going to respond to them when he tries to answer them himself. And I'm not going to give you guys the answers right now. I'm going to wait until he tries to answer them, highlight the problems with his representation of these questions, and then give you an actual answer to these questions.
All right. Okay, so today's topic is Islamic Golden Age. So let's just have a quick look at the Golden Age. At the height of Islamic influence, there were a few centers of incredible cultural creativity. One such site is Bukhara, Uzbekistan. It's still there, guys. You can get on a plane, like Doug did, and visit it. It is an incredible city. I say that without actually having visited it, but I've heard terrific things from Doug. And you can go online as well and look at videos. But it is an incredible city. And it shows you the immense creativity, the artistic creativity of the Islamic Golden Age. But the main cultural center of the Islamic Golden Age is Baghdad, okay? It's not so beautiful now, but back then it was really the center of the world. It's a round city, and it's a new city. This is a topographical map of the city. As you can see, it's surrounded by the Tigris and Euphrates, and it is a round city, okay? One of the few round cities of that time. Baghdad was capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, which started the Islamic Golden Age. The Abbasid Caliphate is the successor to the Umayyad Empire, okay? And this is where the Abbasid Caliphate was. And this is what Muslims consider the height of their civilization. The thing that's really important for us to understand about the Abbasid Empire is that not only were they influential in the Muslim world, but they eventually would come to create the world that we live in today. Okay? So when we think of globalization, we think of this as a recent phenomenon. But look at the trade route that the Abbasid Caliphate would create over its 300 to 400 year history. It connects the entire world. Okay? As I mentioned last semester, globalization has always existed to a certain extent in world history. But the Abbasids, the Muslim religion, would take these existing networks and make them a lot richer, a lot more dense, not faster. Okay?
So I think that's a very, very important point that he just made, because you see first how the Islamic Empire is that it was connected with the rest of the world. There's trading systems going on, there's multiculturalism going on, there's sharing of values and ideas and cultures and understandings between the people. But what's more important is, as he says, that Muslims, what they would do, if they take over a country or they take over a civilization or whatever, they would take existing ideas and they would let them flourish. They would take existing resources, they wouldn't take them out to themselves. They would leave the existing resources and they would flourish that land and that country. They would allow people to practice their faith in harmony. That is the difference between Muslims and the other religions or other ideologies when they conquer and take over lands. And when we look at the Western conquest, or we look at the Christian, when they took over people's land, or we look at Western empires or American empires, any of these empires, whenever they take over land, what they do is they plunder all of the resources that is in that land, in that country, and they take it to themselves, and they allow their country to advance, and they take the knowledge and everything within that country, and then they leave that country for destruction, basically. They destroy the infrastructure of the country. They take everything within it, and they try to become superior while they make any empires or any place that they went in before, any country, they make it inferior and they completely destroy it. So the difference between Islamic expansion, if you want to use that term, and Western expansion is that. So a lot of people come and say, oh, when Muslims talk about like what Westerners do to Middle Eastern countries, or generally even African countries, or any countries when they take over these lands, they say, "Oh, Muslims are complaining, but look at your empire, what you did." Yes, but when Muslims expanded, they did not destroy countries and plunder the resources and destroy their infrastructure and left. Give me an example of Muslims doing that. That wasn't something that Muslims were doing. They look at all of these lands. Look at Baghdad as an example. He said as the capital, was the capital, the major capital of the world, or the capital also of the Muslim empire at the time. It was the center of civilization in the world. That was a place that Muslims took and flourished, right? So there's a difference between when Muslims do something in comparison to when Western civilizations expand or do the same exact thing.
The main center for cultural production in the Muslim world is something called the House of Wisdom, and its model is the Library of Alexandria. Okay, we remember last semester we discussed the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, and its mission was to be the first university to take all Hellenistic knowledge and culture and systemize it for dissemination. And the House of Wisdom was doing the same thing, where it would take all knowledge and culture within the Islamic world and outside the Islamic world and systemize and standardize it for mass dissemination. So the things that they were doing were they were taking Hindu numerals, okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3. We still use them today. They took it from India, and again, they standardized it and disseminated this knowledge. They took works from Aristotle and Plato, translated it into Arabic and Persian, and then disseminated it. The main contribution of the Islamic Golden Age to world culture is actually mathematics. Okay, so they took all the math in the Greek world and in the Persian world and in the Hindu world, and then they would systemize it and then build on top of it. This is a rendition of the House of Wisdom. This is where the three major creative civilizations would meet and exchange ideas, right? The Greeks, the Jews, and the Persians. They would also take ideas from the Indian tradition and the Chinese tradition as well.
Yes, Muslims had this idea of the House of Wisdom, or Bayt al-Hikmah, where you would have translation of literature from other languages, you'd have discussions, you'd have flourishing of science. So this is another example where you have the Western civilizations and their arguments. Muslims, oh look, the Westerns love the West. Like, oh look, Muslims, they took over. They would. There's no free speech. There's no education. There's no science. You look at Islamic history. When Muslims were in power, they allowed knowledge to flourish. They translated foreign knowledge. They experimented and allowed science and knowledge in general to flourish. Whether it is, and we're going to talk about some of the examples of Muslims within the Islamic Empire, scientists and otherwise, and great figures in history which shape the history that we live in today. But this is a clear refutation of this idea that Muslims were like, anti speech, anti discussion, anti dialogue between different ideologies. That is not definitely true.
Ibn Sina is probably the most famous intellectual of the Islamic Golden Age. His books, his works were admired. Okay, so the Islamic philosophy was being exported to Europe, where it would have a major influence on many of Europe's major thinkers. You may have heard of a man named Leonardo Fibonacci. You should have heard of him in math class. Well, at this particular time in history, he was going to Baghdad to study from the leading mathematicians of his time, taking their ideas and importing them all back to Europe. Okay, so this is Ibn Sina, and the Latin name is Avicenna. Ibn Rushd, Averroes, is also a major intellectual at this time. Just to show you how influential these two were in Europe, let's look at Dante's Divine Comedy. So Dante is in hell, and there in limbo, he's meeting the most influential, the greatest philosophers in human history, who have influenced European civilization. Obviously, he's going to name Socrates and Plato, okay? But guess what? He also names Averroes and Avicenna, okay? So Dante is acknowledging the debt Europeans have to Islam. This is important for us because the Muslim intellectual influence on Europe has been whitewashed in history. This is something you do not learn in school usually. But without Islam, you can make the argument that Europe could not have modernized, okay? And later on, I'll explain why that's the case.
So that is, again, another very, very, very important point to highlight. So he's mentioning these names. He didn't talk about this. It's very important. He didn't mention this idea. So he mentions people like Ibn Rushd, people like Ibn Sina, Al-Khawarizmi, Ibn al-Haytham, Hasan al-Haytham. He mentioned so many people, but he didn't mention why they were translating or Latinizing their names and changing their names into Avicenna and Averroes and Algorithmi and all of these translations. It's not just simply because it was a different language. It's not that, because you can type the letters in your own language and you can still say the name. The main reason they were doing that is because this idea of the history and civilization of the West being stolen from the Muslims, they had to cover it up somehow. So if they go and they steal knowledge, like you say, going to Baghdad and learning knowledge from Muslims there, or people who were within the Islamic civilization, physicians or otherwise, like you have Ibn Sina, and you have all of these people. You have the books and editions being taught in books of physician today in the biggest schools in the UK and America. You have statues of people like Al-Razi in France, I believe, and other places. They have these people, right? And they Latinize and they change their names because they don't want people to understand that, look, the source of these knowledge are actually Arabic names or Muslim names. That this knowledge actually came from Muslims. So if I change the name that like a student is reading, that's not true this guy's a Muslim, right? Like if you go to most of these people in these universities, being taught this knowledge was like 16 different editions when it comes to physician and knowledge of medicine, taken from Ibn Sina or whatever. You ask them, who's Avicenna or Avicenna, or they say, oh, look, he was a Greek person. No, he wasn't Greek. You just Latinized the name, changed it to Latin and Greek. So when you're reading it, you think, oh, all of this knowledge actually comes from the Greeks. All of this knowledge actually comes from other people, the Roman Empire accepting Christianity, rather than it actually came from the Islamic golden age. This idea of whitewashing, you just said whitewashing. You have to actually explain what it means, the significance of people like that. So he's going to also mention different people.
Umar Khayyam is also another famous intellectual, poet, philosopher. This man, Musa al-Hazami.
Obviously, he's talking about Al-Khawarizmi, but he's not a native Arabic speaker, and he says that himself, so we're not going to talk about him butchering the names or whatever. But yeah, and then algorithm, the idea of algorithms come, and this, computers using laptops, and all of this stuff is also, and algebra as an entire science coming from Muslims, coming from someone like that. Most people don't know. They don't know where the idea of the word algorithm, where does it come from, or where does it trace back to. So many people don't know this, and it's really sad.
This name is Al-Hazan, and he invented physics, basically optics. Again, extremely influential. And again, these ideas will be imported back to Europe, and they will become the basis of the Renaissance. Okay?
Yeah, so here he mentions Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham. He says Al-Hazan, but Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham, he didn't talk much about him. But yeah, the world's first true scientist. It's a huge thing to mention for those people, especially today in this day and age in the West, who are fascinated with science. They don't understand. He's the first person to develop the modern scientific method, this idea of experimentation, repeatability, and falsification. And you can say the inventor of camera, these two ideas in his book, Optics, right? You can see this idea, and he says that it influenced the Renaissance, right? The idea of like from 14th to the 17th century, where Europe actually was revived and they started using that knowledge, but nobody talks about where this knowledge came from, where they revived from this dark ages into the ages that they became later on. So the reality is this knowledge was all exported, taken away from the Muslims, people like these individuals we're mentioning. He didn't mention many people like, for example, Abbas ibn Firnas, the first human being to fly in human history, for example. There's so many people, some of the names that he's mentioned and many, many more that are not highlighted in Western history for a reason. And I mentioned that reason, obviously.
Al-Zawahiri is the father of surgery. At this time in world history, the very best hospitals are in the Islamic world, by far. This is the first 24-hour hospital in Baghdad. What's also amazing about these hospitals is that if you are poor and could not pay, you could receive medical treatment for free. That was just part of the faith. All poor were treated with great charity and kindness during the Islamic Golden Age.
So here he talks about the first, you can say first 24 hours hospital in Baghdad. And he mentions this very important point that treatment wasn't only 24 hours, but it was free for everyone. Now, even in this day and age, today, the people who want to talk to us like they are come from a moral high ground and enlightenment period and whatever, they don't have like this idea of treating him for free. You have to pay in most places. And if there is free health service in many countries, it's the worst service that you could possibly have. This was the peak of civilization, a peak of medicine, and it was for free. And it was for everyone, anyone who is sick.
This is Al-Qarawiyyan. Again, guys, I don't speak Arabic. I'm probably butchering the name. But it was founded in 859 in Fez, Morocco. This is important because this is actually the first degree-granting university in the whole world. It's still there, guys. Okay, this is the oldest university in the world. What's also amazing is it was founded by a woman who inherited a fortune from her father, and she spent all her money on building this university.
So here he also mentions the first university. So we're talking about the first 24 hours hospital, then we have the first university. A lot of the Westerns listen to this information. They have no clue that this was the Islamic history that was going on. And in reality, the civilization that we're living in today is heavily, if not 90% of it, is built upon this Islamic foundation. Now, of course, we're not going to take the credit from the scientists and the intelligent people within the Western world who used this information and developed it and enhanced it in many ways. That is for sure the case. You take the previous knowledge and you build upon it. But you don't take away the foundation, right? You don't take away the foundation. Don't show ingratitude to the people who allowed you to reach where you are today.
From 1300 to 1700, the world was dominated by three major empires: the Ottomans, the Safavids in Iran, and the Mughals in India. They are collectively known as the gunpowder empires. So what's amazing is, since its inception about 622 up until the year 1700, the Islamic religion dominated the world. And so the question for us is, why was that the case? How did Islam overtake Europe and overtake Christianity? Okay, that is a mystery and question for us today.
A lot of people wouldn't want to answer this mystery with the simple idea that Muslims were people who were truly upon their faith, and they knew that they are upon the truth, and they knew that this religion comes from the Creator, and they implemented the teachings within their faith, which allowed them to become what they became. So that is our Islamic narrative. But you have a lot of people like, oh, it's a mystery. It's how did this happen? Well, it happened because of that reason. That's why if you look at these battles between Muslims and empires, it wasn't like the Muslims were more sophisticated in their cavalry and in their weapons and their tactics. That wasn't the case. It was simply people who were a lot less equipped when it comes to military, when it comes to these ideas, when it comes to weaponry, but they were people of true faith. And that's why they were able to defeat people who were more advanced than them in these worldly aspects.
That we'll look at. Okay, so let's go back to the three mysteries that I introduced earlier. Why do we have no written records? Even though we know that the people within the movement, Jews and Christians, knew how to read and write. Okay, that's the first question. Second question is, why didn't Muhammad name a successor? The third question is, why was the Al-Aqsa mosque built on top of the Temple Mount? Okay, so this is a paradox because Jews were an extremely important part of that early movement, right? So why would you offend the Jews like this? Right? Okay, to understand what happened, okay, let's go back in time. And we know that in 622, Muhammad goes to Medina, and that's what starts the Islamic movement. But let's just go over to Jerusalem and figure out what's happening there. And once we do that, then we're able to figure out what's going on in that world. It turns out that in 622, there's a major war going on between the two major powers at this time, the Persians and the Byzantines. And it is a deadly war that is engulfing the entire Middle East. Okay? So this is from Wikipedia, all right? Now, guys, never trust Wikipedia as a historical source, but it's useful for us to understand what contemporary historians think, okay? So this is from Wikipedia. The Jews have aligned themselves with the Persians. Why? Because, first of all, the Romans controlled Jerusalem, and in the year 70, the Romans burned down their temple, and in the year 135, the Romans expelled the Jews from Jerusalem, their holy city. So ever since then, the Jews obviously they want revenge, but they also want to return to the holy city and rebuild the temple. And with the Persians, they saw this as an opportunity because historically the Persians and the Jews have gone on very well. Okay, so the Jews helped the Persians take Jerusalem and push out the Byzantines. But when that happens, the Christians in Jerusalem, they revolt and they force out the Jews, and then the Byzantines, under the emperor Heraclius, they return to Jerusalem in the first crusade. Okay? This is the beginning of the idea of crusade, and they retake the city, and then what they do is they expel them from Jerusalem, obviously, but then they start to kill a lot of Jews. Okay? And they force these Jews outside of Jerusalem. So now these Jews have nowhere to go. But there's something called the Constitution of Medina in Arabia, right? There is a prophet, Muhammad, who is promising religious tolerance for all. All can practice their faith in peace, right? So it makes sense for a lot of these Jews, not all of them, but a lot of them, to join this early movement. What's important for us to understand is that at this point, Muslim is not a distinct